As you can see at the screen, I have a newspaper article that was from a newspaper in Delray Beach, Florida, September 28th, 1961. Token integration comes quietly to Seacrest High School. Token integration. Well, I am so honored to have as my guest tonight the young girl who was considered the token to integrate Seacrest High School in Delray Beach, Florida in 1961, 60 years ago. Mrs. Yvonne Lee Odom, thank you so much for being with us tonight on Sisters of Wellness.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Mrs. Yvonne Lee Odom is one of 4 or 5 students across that community to be the first people of color to walk into these schools that were all white. And they broke the color barriers in these schools and faced hostility and had to deal with the stress of being the only ones in these schools. And we honor you tonight. Let me just say this first of all, for every African American in the United States of America who's ever gone to a public school or school period, we honor you tonight and thank you for what you did.
Well, at the time, I didn't realize I was doing something great. I just was going to school.
You were 15 years old.
Yes, I was.
How did you find out that you were going to be the one to integrate the schools in Delray Beach, Florida?
Well, it was a Thursday. I was already settled into my school at Carver High School. It was going into my sophomore year. And in the black high schools, we elect our queens the year before, and I had been elected. Miss Carver attended, being in 10th grade, because Miss Carver was a senior, and I was a starting guard on my high school basketball team. And I had gone to a football game that Thursday night because in our town, the black schools played on Thursday and the white schools played on Friday night because they did go to each other's games. I came home from the football game, and my father, who was an activist, always have been, simply quietly said to me, he said, "You know, I filled out a piece of paper for you to go to Seacrest." And I was like, "You did what?" And what I found out later, there was a group out of West Palm who were seeking to get someone that they could send to these schools because our county had not done anything actively to integrate the school system. They put in place what was called freedom of choice, where the white kids would choose to go to an all black school and vice versa. But at that time in 1961, 7 years after the board had, Supreme Court had ruled in 1954 that separate but equal was inherently unequal, and Palm Beach County hadn't done anything. Uh, a ruling had come down that they had to integrate the schools because we had an attorney, a young black attorney, who filed a lawsuit against the school district on behalf of his sons. And by the time they ruled, his children were out of school age. So they were looking for others. And my father volunteered me after being asked by a group of citizens who said we needed someone to send to Seacrest. And that's how I got the news. And no, I didn't want to do it.
What was that? And there was no conversation. Daddy, don't send me.
Well, he just said he filled out the paperwork for me to go. He didn't ask me. He had already filled it out. And like I said, that was a Thursday. So when I went to school Friday and everybody at the school had found out about it, then they were like, "Oh, yeah, you should go. You will be good." So I got a lot of support from my classmates and my teachers who encouraged me to take it up and do it. So it became more of an assignment rather than, me just trying to do something because I love my Carver High School because I was very involved, very active, and I did not want to leave.
let's just set the scene in Delray
Yes.
Beach, 1956. There was all of the problems that were taking place just with people trying to go swimming. It's a
Oh
beach
yeah.
town.
Oh yeah.
So
I
there was a
lived in
lot of tension with people just wanting to go swimming, with Black people rather wanting to go swimming in the ocean.
yes.
And here
Oh
you are
yeah.
going to walk into the classrooms and sit down next to them. And you were even told not to go to the regular bathroom.
I was because apparently um, they had anticipated that perhaps the students would be more violent than they really wasn't violent like they anticipated, but because of the way things had happened in prior schools, because it was all over the news, I give credit that the Palm Beach County and Delray did a good job in trying to avoid all that confrontation. And I received a letter from the school district, reassigning me. And we were told to come to school like 10 o'clock rather than coming when school started at 8 o'clock.
Ah,
Yes, yes. So we met with the principal. Bob Fulton was the principal at the time. And during that conversation, that's when Mr. Fulton had made the suggestion that I perhaps would like to use the faculty restroom rather than the student restrooms. They didn't put me in a PE class, which anybody who know me know I'm an athlete, and that was not good. But I refused. I said, "Oh no, I'm going to use the same restroom all the other kids, use." For a semester, though, I did not go to a PE class, but that eventually changed. But those were things that they put in place in anticipation of me being beat up or something. Also, the buses, I was not allowed to ride the school bus because I was living in Boynton and the school bus took us to school. So I had a teacher, my teacher that was my homeroom teacher at Carver, Mr. Ben Kane, and bless his heart, he's still alive.
really?
He would drop me off at Seacrest on his way to Carver. He did that until I turned 16 and my daddy bought me a car.
So you were discouraged. Well, they just told you don't ride the bus.
Oh yeah.
For
Oh
your
yeah.
safety, not to ride the bus. If you're
Right.
just joining us, I'm talking to Ms. Yvonne Lee Odom. Mrs. Yvonne Lee Odom integrated Seacrest High School in Delray Beach, Florida. And this is a newspaper article that we have. This is the headline that read, Token Integration Comes Quietly to Seacrest. And Miss Yvonne was the quietness of that. So you're encouraged not to ride the bus
Yes.
because they were concerned for your safety.
Yes.
All of these measures that were put in place because there was already tension in Seacrest and around the country during this
Oh,
time of
absolutely. They even
forced.
blocked off the streets.
They
I
blocked
found
off the
this.
street.
They blocked off the street, the local police department, because I think people had noticed what had happened in other cities. And it was not very pleasant. And I do give credit. Now, mind you, this I didn't know. I found all of this out later. I
Mm.
just was going to school. My daddy took me to school and I went to classes. So, but I found out that's some of the precautions that our local school district and our local principal took. Because I also, if you notice that little girl, that white girl that's by me, she was the one who volunteered to walk me around. And for years, 40 years later, we reunited and we would have lunch together every now and then. Unfortunately, she and her husband passed away in a tragic accident.
Mm.
But she was the editor of the newspaper. She was a senior when I was a sophomore. So they did do some proactive things with their students. I found out later that Mr. Fulton had a meeting. He called a meeting with the student leaders at that school at the time. And I don't know if he cajoled, strongly encouraged that, they would treat me with respect. Again, this is something I did not know, but, there were things I couldn't do. I wanted to be a cheerleader. I was an athlete. I wanted to, run track. In the white schools, they didn't have that. And I remember my PE teacher telling me, she said, well, Yvonne, that's what she called me. She says, The other schools are not ready for you. Those that will be we would be playing schools like Belgrade, Pahokee. Now you think 60 years ago, and those were her words. And so we did a lot of intramural stuff. But as far as being on a team where we had to, travel to other schools, and she wasn't mean about it. She was just, I guess, trying to be honest. And she just said the schools are just not ready for you. Those were her words.
And did you ask, what does that mean? They're not ready
Oh,
for
I knew
what?
absolutely what it meant. But one thing I did do, and I don't know what made me do this. I said, now, if I'm going to integrate this school, I'm going to integrate this school. So I attended, I mean, some of everything. I ran for political office. I went to all the football games, the proms. My husband and I, who was my high school sweetheart at the time, he stayed at the All Black Carver. He loved his school. So we went to four proms, his two, my two. And I often tease, the Carver proms was in the gym. You know how that is.
Yes.
But Seacrest, we went to the Boca Raton Hotel and Club.
Oh, wow. A little different.
Yes, it was slightly different.
Yes. In
Yeah,
the black high schools, they were decorating the gym.
absolutely. And honey, we had a good time too.
I know, I know. I went to East High School in Jackson, Tennessee,
Yes, yes,
till the third grade when they integrated. You
yes.
talked about what you wanted to do and what you had to sacrifice because you were colored going to a white school. How does that make you feel about what your potential could have been had you been given the opportunity to run track, to participate in the
Well, I
things?
teased my children, of course, because I was a very good athlete, but I only competed against other white kids. Now, when we were at Carver and we were all black, Mr. Pompey, my former coach, was very innovative. And we had championships in the black schools, and I really believe, and I still believe this, that I probably would have been a Tiger Bell. I know you know who that is, Tennessee State.
Yes, indeed.
They
Yes,
are that's that historic Olympic track team that won gold. So
yes.
that would have been my my how they say your spiritual imagination
Yeah.
because I was very fast at the time. I ran the 50-yard dash if you want to believe
Oh, you look.
it.
And so to have been denied that, to stand in harm's way, how does that balance out for you as you look at it today?
Well, I saw it those 3 years because I remember I told you I stayed there 3 years. I went in my 10th grade. I was the only black student there, the full 10th grade.
In the
11th
whole
grade,
school.
huh?
In the whole school.
Oh, in the whole school, yes, the whole school. And then by my senior year, the other black students came from Boynton, was assigned there, and there was five of us who actually graduated. But I saw it once I got over there. It gave me such an eye opening about um, what we were led to believe. When I say we, black students and black people in general were led to believe that we were inferior, that we didn't do things very well, that the white kids did everything so better. And I was like, well, my God, I'm smarter than a lot of these kids. That was my awakening. And athletically, I just did my thing. And it just was a societal awakening. And I have spent my lifetime trying to instill in our black people that you are just as good as anybody else. And we were led to believe we weren't.
And
Those
still
3 years taught
today.
me a lesson.
And still today, Mrs. Odom.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why we should continue the conversation. I use Barack Obama a lot as an example because in my lifetime, I never would have dreamed that we would have a black president. Now, think about it. We couldn't even vote. I remember that. So, but my question always is, do you think I would have voted for him had he not been qualified?
Yeah.
See, I have a black pharmacist now. Matter of fact, he's a FAMU graduate. I tease him about it because we cook my nights here.
Yes,
But
yes.
anyway, would I go and get medicine from this man if he's not qualified? We're not asking anybody to go to somebody black because they black, but they qualified. They can do the job. All they need is the opportunity, and that's what I realized those 3 years I was over there.
When you look at where we are in the school system today, and Dr. Janice Epperson is watching in Tennessee, she said she is enjoying the conversation. She is a superintendent of schools in West Tennessee. When you look at where we are today as African Americans in the school system after civil rights activists and leaders like you were not, you didn't know that you were at the time, but you were leading the way. When you look at where we are now after forced um, integration, forced desegregation of schools, where are Black students today in 2022 compared to where they were before integration?
Well, I think if you talk to anybody in my generation, we would say that it has not been to our benefit to the most part. But think about it. It was against the law for us to go in a McDonald's. It was against the law to stay in a Howard Johnson. Those laws have been changed, but what has happened, white people have voluntarily leave. You look at my own hometown right here in Delray. Our private schools are predominantly white, and our public schools are predominantly black. And what's happening, funding, see, you got to fund public schools because private schools can say, I don't want you. Public schools say we have to educate our kids, and we have to remember that because education has made all the difference. So, as far as the law is concerned, uh, we've made some stride because they closed down a Royal Castle in Boynton when I went in there with three white girls and they took their orders and didn't take mine. They tore the store down. So I remember that, but the girls were started crying. They didn't realize that's why we have to talk about it. And we have to get out of this looking at somebody and thinking they're no good. Now, having been there for 3 years, this is the realization I came that we are not inferior, that we don't do anything that's inferior. Now, yes, in every race, you got knuckleheads. There's some people, black folks I don't want to be around, and we know that. But don't lump all us in one mold. And see, I think we're the only race that takes the ills of whatever wrong a black person does.
Right.
My husband, my son, they're good people. But if a person just look at them, they think they might be a robber. My son for a long time had dreads. And the police would stop him just because he had dreads. He cut his hair, he didn't get stopped. The house I'm living in now, we couldn't buy a lot out here. And my husband used to get stopped all the time. And he's not a very pleasant person sometimes when he's stopped by the police, but that's what it was. And white people does not accept the fact that they do that. They
Miss
will not
Odom,
believe it. That's why we have to continue to tell the story. And I'm not trying to make an excuse. I am just looking at the reality. And we as black people can't make an excuse when somebody's wrong either.
right, right.
We can't take up for somebody when they're wrong. But what has happened in America, African Americans are the only ones that the entire race got to take on the ills of the worst of us.
And the best of us, like you, that integrated schools, why do you think your stories haven't been told? Here we are, 60 years after you integrated the schools. There have been some efforts, and let me just say thank you to Samuel Adams, who lives in Chicago, but Delray Beach is his hometown, who has worked to help tell your story and get you honored in your community.
But
Why do
you
you
know
think it's
what?
taken this
Yes,
long?
we just have to keep telling. And it's like Dr. King. It was long after his death, but so before people started realizing, what a great man he was. And trust me, I do not live to get accolades. But most of my career, actually all of my career, I taught in Delray. And I taught for a long time at-risk kids. And that was my main thing about self-confidence. getting kids, no matter what your circumstance, you can rise above it. And see, even now with this pandemic, mental health is very important, and we're not paying enough attention to that. Now, when I was a child, we had enough people in our Black community who encouraged us enough that we were able to ride that wave. But now what's happening, because you don't have, because I was born in Daytona, and in Daytona, we had enough Blacks that we had our own theater, our own pool, our own churches. Yes. And then we moved to a little town called Boynton Beach when I was in eighth grade, where there was no pool. The pool they had was not for Black folk. The theater they had was not for Black people. The restaurants they had, they tore them down rather than you integrated. So that was a cultural shock for me, having to move from Daytona to Boynton. Now, mind you, my grandfather graduated from college. He graduated from a school called Florida Normal School for Colors. It is now Florida Memorial, but it was in St. Augustine at the time, 1943. Then my daddy graduated from Bethune-Cookman College in Daytona in 1948. So I'm a third generation college graduate, which is unusual for African Americans. So it was never like broadcasted, but it was just assumed. You would go to school, get an education. Then my husband's side of the family, his niece was the first one to actually graduate from college. She's a principal now and doing very well. But there were just no opportunities for a lot of our people because of the laws and the opportunity. You're just not going to go to that school. My father, who graduated from Cookman, the state of Florida paid other states for him to go get his graduate degree. He wanted to go to Stetson right there in, where Stetson is, in D-Land. And see, I remember that. He told us that story as a child.
Wow,
So
wow.
yeah, so we have to talk about it. See, people now you're talking about critical race theory. We don't want people to feel bad. I don't want people to feel bad. I just want you to be knowledgeable about the real history.
Yeah. So,
Yes,
well, let me just, speaking of real history, so
yes,
the Supreme Court ruling that school systems across the United States were supposed to move with, what's the
all
word?
deliberate speed.
All deliberate speed, 1954,
Yes,
all deliberate speed to desegregate schools. However, it wasn't until 1961 that schools were desegregated in your town
that's
of
right.
Delray Beach
Yes.
in Jackson, Tennessee. It wasn't until 1968. And Mrs. Odom, do you know when the last school in the United States was desegregated?
No, I don't.
2016, Cleveland, Mississippi.
Oh wow. I can believe it. And even now, because what's happening here, we are resegregating on choice. We use these charter schools as a
Yes,
sham. And
yes.
I'm gonna give you a concrete example right in Belglade. Now, Belglade only had one Black high school, one white high school. So that was the only
Well,
choice.
let me just
Sure.
before you go into that too deep,
Uh-huh.
why is it that why are we standing by watching that happen? Because it initially started with accelerated classes and then classes for alternative students or alternative schools. That's how it first started in the public school system to have to have integration within segregation. And then it just got so bold that we started charter schools and use taxpayers' dollars to essentially pay for private education under the name of charter schools. Why
Yes.
have you're an educator, you're around you're from a family of educators. Why do you think that Black people have been tolerant of that?
Because now think about it. All of us don't believe ourselves. We all are not, we are different. Um, because we have a lot of Black people who go to these charter schools because I think some people think that sitting next to a white kid is going to benefit their child. And we just got to make sure our children are educated and stop making excuses. Because the color of our skin, still in the eyes of many white people, is not a good thing. And we still have some Black people who feel the same way.
Well, not only the color of the skin, the fact that they use the formula that if families qualify for free lunch, it's a failing school because over 70% of the kids qualify for free lunch. Well,
Absolutely.
after the Emancipation Proclamation, every Negro in America qualified for free lunch.
Oh, absolutely.
But
And not
today,
only that, it the once a school, I would say roughly 6%. If it's 6% African American, that's an F school in the eyes of anybody. They don't. You don't have to look at anything else. You don't look at the scores. You don't look at the band. You don't look at the chorus. You don't look at the dance team. You look at the makeup of the children in the school. And if it's a colored school, it's a bad school. And
today,
that's what's happening now. Look at what's happening now with the HBCUs. Those people who went to those schools, because we all over the place. I have a son went to FAMU, my daughter went to Cookman, but my other daughter went to Florida State. So we all over the place. But the the idea that if you go to a HBCU, that your education gonna be inferior. And I tell them, look, everybody I know that graduated from Cookman got good jobs. You know what I mean? So that's a misnomer. Now, it's taken Deion Sanders in athletics to prove to a whole lot of people that coming to a HBCU is not going to make you inferior by no means. But that's been the hype and the
and
belief.
unfortunately, all of those who graduated from HBCUs have remained silent in
Not anymore. I think lately they've been, just think of the national scene now. What's going on with those who have graduated?
well,
It's
about time,
Yes,
but
I know.
still,
And it's been
still,
a while because I told you we didn't have that belief ourselves. That's
we
something
didn't
we
have the
didn't
belief
believe.
ourselves.
Yes, we have to believe that. We really do. So,
What do you think needs to take place so that because you you're in your 70s, many
yes.
of the people who integrated schools are in their 60s and 70s, African American living legends, living uh, history, living walking history. How do we make sure? And if anybody is watching this, if you know someone in your community who was on the front lines by, as this headline says, being a token in integrating the schools in your community, please let me know because I certainly would love to interview them and to share their stories. How do we keep this message alive and making sure that our children, or how do you think our children would be observing education if they heard you more often than, no
What Miss
offense, Snoop?
Marsha, I think what you're doing helps. But we also have to keep telling the story. That's all. Without anger, because sometimes that's what happens. You let, it's like something I used to teach to my kids. We can fight without name calling. I call it fighting fair.
Hmm.
Um, that's a technique, and we can tell our stories without fighting fair. That's one thing my father always admired about the Jewish people who always told that story. And they never ever stopped telling it. And that's what we have to do. And without being angry, without it's a fact. And those of you who know me, I got a 15-year-old daughter that's granddaughter that's worldwide now. And that's something we've always tried to instill in my children, because my children grew up in integration. And I had this little thing: if your little white friends can't come to your house, you're not going to theirs. And that's what we have to do it one person at a time, friendships at a time. But you have to get to know other people, and go beyond their skin tone. And in
What?
America, that's how we've been defined.
Yeah. And in 2022, after all of these years, 60 years, do you see any of the people any of the white people that were a part of the schools when
Oh
you and
yes, the
have
fire chief, the
conversations?
former fire chief, and I had school board members. The young lady who I told you, who escorted me down. We used to have lunch together, and she shared with me that she's the only classmate that she even deals with now. And unfortunately, she and her husband died in a drowning accident. But she shared then that it's just that getting to know me. Our former fire chief is one that we're on a committee together. So there are a lot of people in this town that are still around when I integrated. And I'm going to tell you a quick story. 50 years after our graduation, we had our reunion. I went to Carver's, of course, and Seacrest because I always had one foot in each. But my white friends, I got up and I told them that they weren't as bad as a lot of people did. And I just wanted to let them know 50 years later, because I remember the boy that square danced with me without thinking I was some plague, or the one that dissected the frog. And the teachers, I could tell the teachers who were very sensitive. But then on the other hand, there were places I know of a friend who integrated a school, and that school never put her pictures in the yearbook.
Mm,
And that's a guy who shared that with me. It was his sister. And I said, see, the two of us need to come in because I believe when you have intentions, good intentions, things can change. But when you mean, and see, this meanness is stirring back up now.
yeah.
It really is that deep-seated meanness that was so prevalent when I was a child, but not so overt because remember, our communities were so self contained that a lot of us were protected from it.
Hmm.
But as we, get out in this society and the integration, then the resentment is there. It's still there, as if black people are keeping you from getting something. But we still got to have that conversation. The conversation must be had.
Mrs. Odom,
Yes.
I really, really thank you for what you did in 1961, for your father, who I know exercised that instruction to pray without ceasing, as many parents did when they sent their children into all white environments to
Right.
integrate. And I thank you for continuing to be a voice and really appreciate you joining us this evening on Sisters of
But
Wellness.
may I say the names of the other girls that graduated? I know they don't get as much attention. It was
Please.
Shirley King, she's in Boynton, Elma Beckley, who passed away, Nora Jean Coleman was from Boynton, Jeanette Sands passed away, and myself. So it was almost 400 kids, and by the time I was a senior, there was five of us who actually graduated in 1964. So it's still 60 years later.
Well, when you all get when you have talked to them, do you talk about those days?
Not really. Not really, because we weren't there together.
Gotcha.
You see what I'm saying? So I don't know the experiences they had. I just know the ones that I had. And I tell you, I have a new appreciation for my custodians and the people who cut the grass because those were my friends. Because it's like they were my angels when I was over
Yeah.
there. They looked out for me, I tell you.
Were these people of color?
Of course.
Okay, I didn't know. I mean, it was all white
Yes.
school. I
Oh
didn't know.
yes. Oh yes.
And they helped to look out for you.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's
So because
wonderful.
I was over there 3 years, that first year all by myself. But when you if you don't see a picture, then it's like you part of the group. You see what I'm saying? You can't see yourself, but once you look at the picture and say, "Oh, wait a minute, that's me."
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your story with us on Sisters of Wellness, where we
Well,
try
thank
to
you for
do
having me. Yes.
absolutely, where we try to do, as the scripture in Titus says, older women teach the young women. And we thank you for teaching us by the life that you have lived and continue to live in your community across Delray Beach, Florida, and the influence that you've had across the country as your seeds have spread abroad.
Yes.
And we thank you all so much for watching Sisters of Wellness, this episode of Sisters of Wellness, as we're going to continue to tell the stories of African Americans across the United States who helped to desegregate the schools in our country from 1954 to 2016. I'm looking
Wow.
forward to finding somebody in Cleveland, Mississippi. I was floored when I saw that.
Oh, wow.
Look, 1961, 2016.
Yes. Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we
Absolutely.
will look forward to seeing you on Thursday for the Timbuktu Report as we continue to inspire and educate. In the meantime, I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Remember, there is healing at the well. Make it a fantastic moment. We'll see you next time.